They thought I was just a sad old man who didn't know what day it was. They were wrong. And by the time they figured that out, it was too late. My name is not important. What matters is that for 41 years, my wife Elaine drove to the same credit union on Brock Street every single Tuesday morning. She'd leave at 9:15, always with her good coat on, no matter the weather. I never thought to ask why. In 41 years of marriage, you stop questioning the rhythms of a person. You just love them. You assume you know them. That was my first mistake. Elaine passed on a Thursday in late November, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. She was 67 years old, and she still had her garden gloves on the back porch. I couldn't move them for months. Some mornings I'd look at those gloves and just stand there in the kitchen, not knowing what to do with my hands, with the silence, with any of it. We had 2 children. Our son, Nathan, who was 42 and lived in Mississauga with his wife Sandra and their 3 kids, and our daughter, June, who was 38 and had moved back to Kingston, our city, 2 years earlier after her divorce. June was the one who lived closest. June was the one I leaned on most in those first terrible weeks. And June, I would later learn, was the one I should have been most careful around. I was a retired civil engineer. I'd worked 34 years for the city of Kingston. We owned our house outright on Berry Street, a house Elaine and I had bought in 1988 for $112,000. I had a decent pension from the city, a small RRSP, and the savings we'd built quietly over 4 decades. We weren't wealthy by any measure, but we were comfortable. We had enough. Elaine always said, enough is a gift most people never recognize. The Tuesday after Elaine's funeral, I woke up at 9 o'clock and just sat in the bedroom. It hit me that she should have been getting dressed. She should have been putting on that good coat. The house was so quiet, it almost had a sound of its own. I started going through her things slowly, the way you do when you're not ready, but you make yourself start anyway. Mostly I found what you'd expect: clothes, jewelry, her reading glasses in 7 different places throughout the house, old birthday cards she'd kept in a shoebox, letters from her mother before her mother passed. And then, in the back of the closet, behind her winter boots, I found a tin. One of those old, shortbread tins with the Scottish plaid lid. It was heavier than it looked. Inside was a key, not a house key, not a car key. It was a small flat key with a tag attached by a piece of green ribbon. On the tag, in Elaine's handwriting, Suite 14 Kingston Community Credit Union. For Leonard, when the time comes. I sat down on the floor of that closet, and I read it 4 more times. For Leonard, when the time comes. She'd known. She had planned for this. For me, after her. And she hadn't told me a word. I didn't go to the credit union that week. I wasn't ready. I put the tin on my dresser, and I looked at it every morning when I woke up, and every night before I turned off the light. Meanwhile, the family had begun circling. It started subtly, the way these things always do. Nathan and Sandra drove up from Mississauga the weekend after the funeral, which was reasonable, which was kind. They stayed for 2 nights. Sandra made a lasagna. She complimented the house. She walked through the rooms the way a person walks through a property they're already imagining redecorating. On Sunday morning, over coffee, Nathan said that he and Sandra had been talking. They were worried about me living alone. The house was big. The winters in Kingston were hard. They thought maybe I should consider my options. I asked him what options he meant. He said there were some very nice retirement communities in the area, that it might be good for me to be around people my own age, that the house was more than I needed now. I told him I was 69 years old and I'd shoveled that driveway for 30 years and I intended to shovel it for 30 more. He laughed. Sandra did not laugh. She smiled with her mouth only. June was different. June came over nearly every day in those first weeks, which I told myself was love. She'd bring groceries, sit with me, watch old hockey games on the television. She asked gentle questions. How was I sleeping? Was I eating? Had I thought about my finances, just to make sure everything was in order? I thought she was worried about me. I thought she was being a good daughter. She asked, maybe 3 weeks after the funeral, whether I had found anything among Elaine's things. Any documents, paperwork, anything like that. I said I'd found the usual things. She nodded slowly. She asked again about a week later, phrased differently. Had Mom kept any files anywhere, any records of savings or investments? I told her I was still going through things. That was true, but I also began paying closer attention. I finally went to the Kingston Community Credit Union on a Tuesday. I don't know why Tuesday, it just felt right. It felt like Elaine, in the second week of December. I wore my good coat. The woman at the front desk looked at the key and the tag and said she'd get a manager. The manager, a careful, kind man named Mr. Patel, looked at the key and then looked at me for a moment. He said, "Mr. Croft, we were told to expect you eventually." They took me to a private room. The key opened a safety deposit box. Inside was a large envelope, sealed, with my name on it in Elaine's writing. And beneath the envelope, a second, smaller envelope labeled, "Give this to your lawyer first. Do not open without him present." I sat with Mr. Patel and I opened the large envelope. Inside were 41 years of Tuesday mornings. Elaine had been making deposits, small ones, regular ones, into a separate account that existed only in her name, designated as a trust to transfer to me upon her death. She had started it in 1983, the year after Nathan was born, when she told me she'd started a small savings account for emergencies. I remembered that conversation. I thought the account held maybe a few $1,000s. It held $238,000. She had never touched it. Not once in 41 years. She'd deposited whatever she could spare, sometimes $50, sometimes $200 every single Tuesday. She'd reinvested the interest. She treated it like a bill that needed to be paid, regular as the hydro, regular as the property tax, and she had never, in 41 years, told me it existed. There was a letter in the envelope, 6 pages, front and back, in her careful handwriting. She wrote that she'd started the account because she wanted me to be safe. She'd watched her own mother struggle after her father died with nothing but the CPP survivor's benefit and whatever the children could spare. She decided early in our marriage that she would build something I could land on if she went first. She wrote that she knew I would have told her to put the money somewhere else, to spend some of it on a trip, or fix the back porch, or do something reasonable with it. She wrote that she loved me and she knew me, and so she'd kept it to herself. She wrote that by the time I was reading this letter, she imagined the children would already be asking questions. She wrote, "Be careful, Leonard. Love them. But be careful." I sat in that room for a long time. Mr. Patel brought me a glass of water without being asked. I appreciated that more than I could say. I drove home and I called my lawyer, a woman named Ms. Fontaine who had done our wills and had known Elaine for years. I told her I had an envelope from Elaine that was to be opened with her present. She came to the house that afternoon. The smaller envelope contained a document Elaine had filed with the credit union, a legally binding set of instructions naming me as sole beneficiary of the trust account, with specific language barring any family member from contesting the transfer. She had also included a notarized copy of a revised will, dated 8 months before she died. After her diagnosis, I realized that left the house and all assets jointly to me, with a charitable residual clause directing any remaining estate, in the event of my death, to be split equally among our grandchildren in trust until they turn 25, not to our children, to our grandchildren, in trust. Ms. Fontaine read through it and said quietly, "Elaine was thorough." I said, "She always was." What happened next happened quickly. I think June must have spoken to Nathan, because within a week of my visit to the credit union I hadn't told anyone I'd gone. Both of them arrived at the house on a Saturday afternoon, together, with Sandra. Nathan said he wanted to talk about practical matters. He said he'd been speaking to a financial advisor and that there were things I should consider about the house and my assets, about protecting them, about making sure everything was structured properly for the family going forward. Sandra said that if I were ever to sell the house, it would make sense for the proceeds to be kept in the family rather than, and here she paused and said the word carefully, dissipated. I asked her what she meant by dissipated. She said she just meant it would be a shame for assets that had belonged to the family for so long to end up anywhere other than with the children. June was quieter than the other two. She kept looking at her hands. I think, somewhere in her, she already knew she'd made choices she would regret. I told them I appreciated their concern. I offered them tea. We sat in the living room that Elaine had decorated and never changed because she liked it exactly the way it was, and I listened to my son and my daughter-in-law explain to me, in careful language, that they thought they knew better than I did what should be done with my life and my home and my wife's 41 years of Tuesday mornings. I let them finish. Then I told them that I had been to see Ms. Fontaine. I told them that Elaine's estate had been settled clearly and legally, and that there was nothing to discuss in terms of assets or the house, because everything was already in order. I told them that the will had been updated, that it was being filed with the appropriate courts, and that Ms. Fontaine would be in touch with each of them directly if there was anything they needed to know. Sandra asked what the will said. I told her that was between me and my lawyer. Dathan said that as a son, he had a right to know what his inheritance looked like. I told him that inheritance was something you received, not something you were owed. That was the moment things changed in the room. I could feel it. The shift in the air, the way the three of them looked at each other. They'd come expecting an old man who was grieving and confused and grateful for guidance. They found something else. The weeks that followed were not easy. Nathan called several times. The calls were polite on the surface and uncomfortable underneath. Sandra sent an email suggesting I speak to their financial advisor, a man she described as very well regarded, before making any final decisions. June came by less often, and when she did, there was a new tension between us, a careful quality to her questions that had not been there before. I grieved during all of this. I want to be clear about that. I missed Elaine every single day. I talked to her photograph in the kitchen sometimes. I kept her reading glasses on the nightstand even though they made no sense there. Grief does not pause for family drama. It runs alongside everything else like a second river. But Elaine had given me something more than money. She'd given me a map. She'd seen clearly what I couldn't see, because I was too close to it, and she had prepared me. I started attending a grief support group at the Kingston Senior Center on Wednesday evenings. I met people who had been through similar things, not the specifics, but the shape of it, the loneliness and the family pressure, and the sense that your life was suddenly up for negotiation. I found it helped to talk. I found it helped to be around people who were navigating the same water. I also met a man there named Gus, 74 years old, who'd been a retired Crown attorney. We started going for coffee after the Wednesday sessions. He wasn't a practicing lawyer anymore, but he knew enough to help me understand my options clearly. He suggested I put the house into a revocable living trust, a legal structure that would protect it while I was alive and make transfer simpler and less contestable after I was gone. I brought the idea to Ms. Fontaine. She agreed it was sound. We did it. I did not tell Nathan or June. 6 months after Elaine died, I drove to Mississauga to see my grandchildren. Nathan and Sandra's 3 kids were 9, 12, and 15. They knew their grandmother had died, and they were sad about it, the way children are sad. Openly, and then suddenly not, and then suddenly again. I took them to the science center. The 15-year-old pretended to be too old for it, and then forgot to pretend halfway through. We ate butter chicken from a restaurant Elaine would have loved. On the drive back to Kingston, I thought about what she had written. That she built the trust for me so I could land on it. And now I needed to think about what I was building for the ones who came after. I spoke to Miss Fontaine again. We set up a formal trust structure for the grandchildren. Not enormous, I wasn't a wealthy man, but meaningful. Enough to help each of them with education, or a first home, or a year of time to figure out who they were. Held separately, managed by the credit union, with Ms. Fontaine as co-trustee. Nathan and Sandra had no role in it and no visibility into it. Elaine's house. Our house, I kept. I shoveled the driveway that winter myself. I refinished the back porch in the spring. which I had been meaning to do for 11 years. I put a proper lock on the garden shed. I replaced the kitchen faucet. I fixed things. I stayed. In September of the following year, Nathan called to say that he and Sandra were separating. He said it carefully, plainly, and I could hear underneath the plainness that he was ashamed and also relieved. I told him I was sorry. I told him I was sorry. I told him I loved him. I meant both things. Family is not simple. I have never believed in cutting people off cleanly just because they disappoint you. I believed in holding the door open and letting people find their way back at the pace they were capable of. He came to Kingston for a weekend in October without Sandra, and we sat on the back porch I had refinished, and we talked for 3 hours. He said that he knew he had handled things badly after his mother died. He didn't have a good explanation. I told him I didn't need one. I told him what Elaine used to say about grief, that it makes people strange, that it brings out fears people didn't know they had, that the best you could do was try to find your way back to yourself and hope the people who loved you were still standing there. He cried. I handed him the box of tissues that I now kept on the porch table, because I had found that it was useful. June came to me in November, the first anniversary of Elaine's death. She brought a pot of soup, and she sat down at the kitchen table, and she said she was sorry. No specific accounting of what she was apologizing for, but I understood what she meant. I told her I was glad she'd come. We ate the soup, and then we drove out together to the cemetery and stood for a while in the cold and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing to say. I think about Elaine in those Tuesday mornings often. I think about the discipline of it. $50 here, $100 there, week after week, decade after decade, never wavering, never dipping in even once. I think about what it means to love someone quietly enough to do something for them that they'll never know about until they need it. That is a particular kind of love. Not flashy, not spoken about at dinner parties. Just steady, just Tuesday after Tuesday after Tuesday. I have a garden now. I was never the one who gardened. That was Elaine. But the spring after she died, I found myself out there with her gloves on and her old kneeling pad and a packet of sweet pea seeds I'd found in the shed. I didn't know what I was doing. I looked up videos on the computer. Half of them came out and half of them didn't, and the ones that did were more satisfying than anything I can properly explain. I still go to the Wednesday group, though I don't need it the way I once did. I go because Gus is there, and because sometimes there are new people who look the way I looked that first night, like they've been dropped in the water and haven't found the bottom yet. And I think it's useful for them to see someone who has found it. My grandchildren came for Christmas last year, all 3 of them with Nathan, who was finding his way slowly and doing better than he was. We made a turkey that was slightly too dry, and nobody mentioned it. The 15-year-old, 16 now, helped me carry the table from the dining room into the living room so we could all fit around it. We played cards after dinner. I lost badly and enjoyed every minute of it. At night, after everyone was asleep, I sat in the kitchen the way I've gotten into the habit of doing. I looked at the photograph of Elaine on the shelf. I thought about the tin behind the winter boots, the flat key, the green ribbon, the 6 pages of her handwriting, every Tuesday morning for 41 years. She knew me well enough to know what I would need before I knew I would need it. She loved me well enough to stay quiet about it for 4 decades. She trusted me enough to make sure that when the time came, I would be the one holding the map. The garden gloves are still on the back porch. I use them now, in the spring and the summer. They're a little small for my hands. I don't mind. I still think about that tin sometimes. The plaid lid, the flat key, the green ribbon. Such ordinary things to carry such an extraordinary weight. Elaine didn't leave me money. She left me proof that she had been paying attention for 41 years. Every Tuesday she drove to Brock Street and made a deposit. Not because she doubted me, but because she understood something I hadn't yet learned about how life actually works. That the people who love you most aren't always the ones who tell you everything. Sometimes they're the ones quietly doing the work you didn't know needed doing, while you go about your days thinking everything is fine. What happened after she died wasn't a surprise to her. She had seen it coming, and she had built a wall around me before the storm arrived. Nathan and Sandra and their careful language about structuring assets for the family. June asking gentle questions that weren't quite as gentle as they seemed. These things didn't break me the way they might have broken me without Elaine's preparations. I had the tin. I had Miss Fontaine. I had 41 years of Tuesday mornings standing behind me. I've thought a lot about what separates people who get through hard things from people who get swallowed by them. It isn't luck, not entirely. It isn't money either, though it helps. I think it's something closer to integrity. The private, unglamorous kind that nobody applauds. The kind Elaine practiced every week without telling a soul. She made a promise to herself early in our marriage, and she kept it for 4 decades. That kind of follow-through is rare. That's the backbone of a person. You can't fake it, and you can't borrow it from someone else. And then there's the question of clear-headedness, not being naive about the people around you, even the people you love. I was naive. I saw my son and my daughter coming to the house after the funeral, and I thought grief. I thought concern. I thought family. Elaine saw further than that. She had the wisdom to plan, not just for my financial comfort, but for the moment when I would need to hold my ground, without anger, without panic, without losing myself. She gave me the tools and trusted me to use them. The hardest part, honestly, was staying steady, not shutting the door on Nathan and June permanently, not letting my hurt calcify into something cold. That took more out of me than any legal document or financial trust. It required me to hold 2 things at once. The fact that my children had behaved badly, and the fact that they were still my children, still findable, still capable of finding their way back if I left the light on. Nathan came back. June came back. Not because I forced it, and not because I pretended nothing had happened, but because I kept showing up quietly, the way Elaine had shown up every Tuesday. I am 69 years old. I have a slightly too dry turkey at Christmas, and a garden I don't fully understand, and a pair of gloves that are just a little too small for my hands. I have grandchildren who will one day receive something I built for them, quietly, without fanfare, the way their grandmother built something for me. That is what she taught me, that the most important things you do for the people you love, you often do in the small, ordinary moments no one is watching, and that it is enough, more than enough, to do them anyway.